Hey buddy, watch this.
Hello, Regis Kilbin is the name, and Hearthstone is the game. And today I'm here to talk about my top 10 3-mana cards in Hearthstone. Now, surprisingly, there aren't that many strong cards at the 3-mana slot in Hearthstone. There are a lot that are played, of course, but I really don't think there are any that are like crazy game-changing cards. So this list was somewhat difficult to put together. Only a couple 3-mana cards really stood out to me as really popular in the metagame. So bear with me as we go through this list, but I think I did dig through and find the 10 best 3-mana cards to me. Now that said, of course, you may have some of your own cards that you think are a little better. I'd love to hear those in the comments, so feel free to share them. But hear mine out first. Starting with number 10, I almost hate to include this one, of course. Of course, but Wolf Rider actually cracked the top 10 list. This card is frankly terrible in a sense, in that it's a 3-mana 3/1 that dies so easily. But it's good in that it's played in so many different face decks. It's really one of the best charge cards as far as pumping out damage for the mana cost. 3 damage for 3 mana is quite reasonable, especially when you leave that body behind. So from time to time, this card will actually do 6 damage in a face deck, and that's really all you need it for. It's not a good card, but it's a popular and prominent card, and that means something in a top 10 list. So Wolf Rider actually is the 10th best 3-mana card for me. Moving on to the number 9 slot is a card that not only is a tech card in the sense that it's a card that gets teched into decks, but it's also a tech card in that its name is Mind Control Tech. This 3-mana 3/3 has a great battle cry that kind of counters an aggro board-centric meta. If your opponent has 4 or more minions, you take control of 1 at random. That's a really strong effect that allows slower control style decks to counter really rushy decks that get minions out really fast. And that means from time to time, Mind Control Tech will work its way into the metagame just to kind of counteract those really rush-based decks. And it's not all that common or all that popular. It's gained a little bit of momentum thanks to Reno Jackson and the need to include a variety of different cards in your deck. So that's why Mind Control Tech, even though it's not really the most prominent or strong card or doesn't show up all the time, still makes the top 10 for me. Moving on to the number 8 slot, if I can type it, is the Hunter's Animal Companion. This spell is really just about in every version of Hunter just because it's a real value card. Not only is it a spell which summons a minion, which sometimes can be an advantage in and of itself, but the minions you get from Animal Companion are on average far better costed as far as stats or effects are concerned than a regular 3-mana minion. Of course, you can get the 4/4 taunts, you can get a 4/2 with charge, or a 2/4 that gives all your other minions +1 attack. And usually any of those are good. In certain moments, you'll get the exact one you need for lethal. And the flexibility and the variety and the raw power of Animal Companion make it a pretty much guaranteed card to see in Hunter, and that's why it's on this list, even though it's not a neutral card. Moving on to the number 7 slot is Hex. This is another free card. There have been a surprising number of free basic cards in this so far, but Hex is a Shaman card this time, and it's really the best spot removal, single target removal card in the game, despite being free and only 3 mana. This time, anytime you cast a spell on a minion, it turns it into a 0/1 frog with taunt, which I think is much better than Polymorph. Not only does it cost 1 mana less, but the minion they get is a little bit worse. So this has made control-style Shaman decks possible throughout the history of Hearthstone. Of course, those aren't exactly popular nowadays, but Hex is still a good card. Any mid-range or control Shaman is going to fit 2 Hexes into their deck list just because it is so strong at removing big scary minions, and there are so many big scary minions in the game these days. So moving on to the number 6 card. This one is a Warlock card, a 3-mana minion by the name of Imp Gang Boss. This 3-mana 2/4 is just packed with value. Anytime this minion takes damage, it summons a 1/1 Imp. So not only getting a really solid 2/4 body for 3 mana, that's very reasonable in and of itself, but also you have the potential to get 4 extra Imps from this guy, which means you could theoretically attach a 4/4 minion on top of this one. Okay, so we'll come back soon to move on to numbers 5 through 1. It seems Hearthstone doesn't like us today. And we're back. We have appeased the Hearthstone gods, and Imp Gang Boss is back in front of us. As I was saying, this minion is just loaded with so much stat value that it's really the perfect turn 3 for Warlocks. It gets bodies on the board, it gets stats on the board, it's great for absorbing buffs, and it gave them exactly what they needed to reinforce the Zoo archetype, but it's also good in decks like Reno Lock or even slower handlock style Warlocks, that it just gives them a good early game play to build on and counter aggressive decks. So moving on to the number 5 card, if I can find it, is another class-specific 3-drop from Blackrock Mountain. This time it's Flamewaker, the 3-mana mage card. It's another 2/4 minion with an equally, if not stronger, effect. Anytime you cast a spell with Flamewaker on the board, he's going to do 2 damage randomly split among all enemies. So in Tempo Mage decks, this is particularly powerful. With 2 or 3 spells, this guy can do something like 6 damage in a single turn, which is really quite common for Tempo Mages who run so many spells. And in reality, Flamewaker kind of enabled the Tempo Mage archetype to exist in the first place. He's that good that he really created a deck that was built all around his effect, and that deck is still prominent and popular to this day, even though it's been months and months and months since Flamewaker was released. So he's just so strong that as a 3-mana card that's that big of a threat, people have to respond to him. Sometimes that makes them make inefficient plays or weak plays and allows Flamewaker to be good, even in scenarios where he's not all that strong or impactful right away. So the 5th best 3-mana card in Hearthstone. Moving on to the number 4 spot, we're going to head to Druids, and the card that has ended millions of Hearthstone lives all around the world, it's Savage Roar. This 3-mana spell gives all your characters +2 attack this turn. Of course, it's most commonly used with its cousin Force of Nature, which allows Druids to do a 14 damage combo from an empty board for only 9 mana. And of course, that has ended thousands upon millions upon trillions of Hearthstone games throughout its history. Savage Roar, whenever this card is played and you hear that sound, you know that the game is probably over. So not only is this good as a part of the combo in one of the most prominent and consistent decks ever, mid-range Druid, but even in other Druid decks, this is often teched in just as that extra bit of damage with minions that are already on the board. So in hyper-aggressive Druids or even ramp Druids that are taunt heavy and late-game minion heavy, you'll often see Savage Roar snuck in just because it has so much finishing power, and that's why it's the 4th best 3-mana card on Hearthstone. Moving on to the top 3, we have one last class card, and that is Paladin's Muster for Battle. This 3-mana card is really here just because it's packed with so much value, and it really started the trend where Paladins got good. Before this card and before Goblins vs. Gnomes, Paladins really struggled in the metagame, but ever since Muster for Battle, they've really just had some success. This card gave them the ultimate turn 3 play in so many different situations. Not only do you get a nice handy 1/4 weapon, but you get 3/3 in stats split across 3 bodies for 3 mana, which sounds like a lot of 3s, but really it's just a lot of value. If opponents don't have a way to deal with this, there are so many ways for Paladins to leverage this, whether it's something like a Quartermaster or various secrets that benefit from minions being on the board and being killed. Muster for Battle is just the perfect high-value, strong tempo play on turn 3, and it's made Paladins good all by itself. But it's not the best 3-mana card. We have a couple neutral cards reserved for the top 2 slots. Up first, the 2nd best 3-mana card to me is Acolyte of Pain. This is just a 1/3 body that certainly doesn't look threatening or important on a surface level, but its effect is good. Whenever it takes damage, you draw a card. In a lot of decks that lack consistent early game card draw, Acolyte of Pain is exactly what they need to move through their deck. So you'll see this most commonly in decks like Freeze Mage, who might ping an Acolyte of Pain to guarantee at least 2 cards from it. You'll also see it in Warriors, who have lots of whirlwind effects to activate Acolyte of Pain. Even Priests will run Acolyte of Pain with something like a Wild Pyromancer. Virtually any control deck that knows it's going to be running into long battles where cards are a very important resource will find a way to stick an Acolyte of Pain into their deck and gain an advantage from it. So no, it's not the most immediately impactful or exciting or dramatic 3-drop in the game. It's actually quite boring and slow. It's just so prominent and popular and important in the history of Hearthstone meta and still strong to this day and a part of so many different key decks that Acolyte of Pain deserves this top 2 spot. But it's not the best. There's one more 3-mana card that I think is better than Acolyte of Pain, and that is Big Game Hunter. This burly fellow has ended so many dreams. He's a 3-mana 4/2, which is not too bad on its own right, but it's really his battle cry that is so powerful. He can destroy any minion with an attack of 7 or more. So originally this card was used to counter things like Handlock and their horde of Mountain and Molten Giants. It was always popular because of that. But with the inclusion of Dr. Boom in virtually every deck ever since Goblins vs. Gnomes, Big Game Hunter has been there to counter Dr. Boom from the very start. So since every deck runs Dr. Boom, by proxy almost every deck will run Big Game Hunter, unless of course it's a hyper aggressive deck. Maybe you'll see neither. But this card is really just the ultimate answer to extremely greedy and slow, big, scary threats. So when you drop Big Game Hunter and you're actually able to hit a big minion, usually you'll spend 3 mana to remove something that costs 7 mana or more for your opponent, which is a huge tempo advantage, provides incredible swings, and often if it hits at exactly the right moment, Big Game Hunter will win games all on its own. And a card that's that good, that impactful, that dramatic, and that important, and that popular in every single deck in Hearthstone deserves the top spot. This is the best 3-mana card in Hearthstone. If you have different ones, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear your thoughts. If I missed something, if I'm crazy, if I got the order all wrong, tell me. But thanks so much for watching, and until next time, game on!